Welcome to our in-depth question for today. We have a brand new question that we're going to focus on for our session for today. So our topic is on the freedom from the fear of failure. So we're going to cover why are we afraid to fail, and also the challenges of our thinking and how that can impact our ability to take action and actually create us to be even more fearful. So you can get a resource to download with this training. So if you are watching this, comment fail below and we'll get that handout to you that I'm going to share with you on the screen as well. If you are watching the replay, hit replay. And if you're watching it inside of our Maximum Growth Academy, then you'll find the resource at the bottom of this page. So welcome to class. The fear of failure, particularly as a coach, is this barrier that people have, and it prevents them from really realizing their full potential as a coach. Because what happens is you become anxious, you have anxiety that runs through you, and sometimes even avoid doing the work that you'd love to do because maybe you're afraid of making mistakes. Maybe you're worried that you'll mess up the client and make them even more, stressed or challenged than they did when they first came in. So all this fear bubbles up inside. And so fear manifests in lots of different ways, but one of the big ways is just not taking as many risks. It's not stepping forward and risking, because you've got to, in order to get a reward, you have to risk something. And so we don't end up pursuing goals that we want, and we stay more in our comfort zone rather than stretching out and being maybe innovative or bold and stepping out into becoming the coach that we maybe in our hearts feel that we have, but we haven't yet taken some of the action steps we know that would be helpful to get there. So then why do we go through this experience of being afraid to fail? And sometimes I know, having worked with so many coaches, that they have these dynamics where they just shake in their boots and they're like, I'm actually afraid to actually step out. And so one part could be, and I'm going to give you 6 reasons why, that you as a coach may be afraid to fail. This is something to ponder. If this is one of you, I'd love to hear in the chat section, maybe put the number of which one is you. So one could be high expectations. So not unrealistic expectations, but just high expectations as you as a coach. Or maybe you with the delivery of the outcome that you have and want to give your clients. And so this high standard and this high expectation that you have to meet, and the pressure to actually meet it actually stops you from being able to perform it at all, or as much as well as you want to. So that's definitely a reason why people and some coaches are afraid to fail. Another is the imposter syndrome, which is essentially that kind of feeling that, and that sense that you don't feel as knowledgeable, as skilled as you would like, or that you think that you need to be. And then there's a discrepancy between who you want to be and who you are. And you feel like a fraud, but maybe that's partly because maybe how you're selling it or saying it could be not incongruent in alignment, or it's just that learning development stage that you go through. So that can definitely be, imposter syndrome can definitely be a reason why that you have a fear of failure or afraid to fail. And if that is you and you would love an in-depth question on this, we're definitely going to do it. So stay tuned. If that's something of interest, just add it in the chat below. So the next is that it was around the client relationship, because if we have a maybe like an attachment, or we have a desire or a deep drive for us to, and we value the client relationship, and we maybe can put that relationship on a pedestal. And so because of that, we can somewhat maybe walk on eggshells, making sure that we're going to maintain credibility and maintain an outcome for them. And so that kind of fragility that you have around the client relationship, or that perceptions you have around the client relationship, can actually interfere with actually being able to serve, and therefore the fear of failure bubbles up inside. Another reason why people, so this is number 4, another reason why people have and coaches have a difficulty with failure is because if finances are like, kind of here, like stressing you out, and you like, I have to make money, I have to make this work, and there's a lot of pressure, maybe internally and also externally from maybe a family dynamic, that you have to make coaching work. And that definitely is going to make a profound difference in the fear of failure, because you're so attached to the outcome and the result that you kind of blinded to, or not blinded maybe is the wisest word, but maybe more like you lose your love of why you want to serve in the first place, because it becomes out of desperation rather than inspiration. So that's definitely a big one. The other is, so number 5 is perfectionism. And so perfectionism, I did a post the other day, is like that around perfectionism, and how some coaches like strive to be like, make no mistakes, flawless, just like every session that you do, every single time, it's like game on, you're on point, and you make no mistakes, and you hit the nail on the head with them. And a lot of analogies there, but you basically just deliver the results every single time. And because of that ideal of perfectionism can really struggle. People can struggle in order to be able to deliver a service, because they're afraid to fail, because they have the ideal of what it looks like so high. And then also a lack of support. One of the things that people have when it comes to coaching is that if we don't have support around us, then sometimes that afraid to fail is like, what happens if I fail? What happens if I don't know what to do? That's definitely why we show up each and every week inside of Maximum Growth for you, is because it gives you that container as a coach to be able to bounce ideas off. A lot of clients and members in our community will ask me questions like, I've got this particular issue, I'm trying to work through this with a client, what do you suggest? And I give them some guidance and some questions that might be helpful, or things to look out for. We also work through our own stuff within and inside the Maximum Growth, which gives you the ability to be able to work through your dynamic and your own challenges. So we definitely are here in terms of being able to support you along the journey. So that's definitely a challenge that a lot of coaches find, is that it's very an isolated journey, doing the work on your own. You do your learning on your own, your growth on your own, your personal development on your own. And so it just becomes this really somewhat of a lonely journey. So it's definitely why we come in each and every week to apply. So we've got 9 classes at this stage, we've got 9 classes in our Maximum Growth each and every week for you to come in and apply the work, which is super inspiring. Okay, so let's actually get down to the crunch of it. So the crunch is, why are you afraid to fail? And we know that fear has this very much a paralyzing effect on some people. And especially when I know in our hearts, like we have a love to serve. It's definitely something that ripples through the community, is having a love to serve and want to serve with love. And so that heart inside is so important, but sometimes it's our afraid to fail that kind of gets the blocks in the way. And so we want to look at what I call the problem underneath the problem. We get this ball of mess, which we talked about in one of our other classes. And then as we kind of unravel it, we actually just get to see like what's actually stemming inside, and what's actually the lever that if we pull that out, or the string that we pull that out, a lot of other things will unravel. And so the rejection is a big one for people, like that, even just like an anticipation to being rejected, or the potential, because rejection comes with criticism, and it's quite entangled and it's sometimes, because there's some element that they didn't like, critical, whether they're silently critical or loudly critical, and then there's a rejection that happens. And then there can be other elements that kind of stem from that, which is like maybe embarrassment, and then a dynamic that kind of ripples effect out of rejection. So rejection is a big one, of where the stemming of the dynamic of the fear of failure. Another is that if we have our like identity, we talk a lot about identity inside of Maximum Growth, because identity is really big. Like if we have a solid sense of self, both in our personal life and professional life, sometimes people can personally have a solid sense of self, but still trying to discover themselves professionally, or professionally they're very solid, but personally they kind of find themselves falling to prey to different dynamics and different people, and kind of lose a sense of self in maybe intimate relationships or friendships. And so what we want to be able to do is the stronger sense of self that we have and the stronger sense of identity we have, the less likely we are to fear failure because we're solid in who we are. And so there are just a couple of reasons why. Oh, and also comparison to others. Like if fear of failure is definitely like if we're kind of putting ourselves up against someone else and we're thinking about them and not us, then and the bigger degree of comparison that we have is the bigger degree of sometimes fear that bubbles up for some people because they really want to be successful, but you're going to fail if you're trying to be you. It's something we discussed in one of our classes this week, actually, is because I've been helping people to apply the Demartini method and specifically the Demartini method in all the different forms and contexts. So not necessarily in a particular niche, but just broadly across a lot of issues that I've been doing for 15 years. And so there'd be no way that if I had been subordinating to an authority around that I would still be doing it 15 years later, because you can't sustain something that's inauthentic to you or that's not really true for you. So we want to be able to acknowledge and recognize that when we get to be our sense of identity and we feel like we can express that identity out to the world, which is another way to say being authentic, then you're less likely to have that fear of failure. So I just want to jump in and I just want to share with you, we have this like a afraid to fail cycle, and let's call it this kind of repeated cycle that you might go through. And so I just want to share with you this cycle. It's in your workbook. And so what happens is when we go through this kind of dynamic, what can happen is we can just get into this cycle that seems to go on and on and on, and we find it really difficult to kind of find ourselves get out of it. So I just want you to imagine that we settle. And so the moment we're settling, well, actually it starts with self-doubt. And so we have this self-doubt dynamic that goes in, which is all that like internal chatter and noise, whether it be imposed from authorities or yourself, kind of this dynamic that's happening and your internal processing. And then from there, we do an avoidance mechanism. We have an avoidance behavior or avoidance mechanism. And so that's where we just avoid doing the work, avoid, taking risks, avoid people, avoid asking and asking for a sale. And so we do a lot of avoidance tactics because we're afraid to fail, because we don't want the outcome. And then we settle. And so then settling brings it back into more self-doubt, because then the more you settle, the more self-doubt you have. And we just go through this like very vicious cycle, it can feel like sometimes, because we are really stuck in this cycle that we can't seem to break out of. And so we want to notice when we're in that cycle. So if you've ever been there, I'd love to know. And so what we want to be able to do is like, how do we actually find ourselves and get ourselves out of that so we can reach our full potential as a coach? Because something that I was working with today in one of my sessions with a private client was around like, you have a service to offer the world. Like you have something really unique with all the years of experience that you have. You actually have, it could go and make a profound difference to someone's life, to someone's business, to someone's relationship or their health or whatever area of life that you coach in. You can make a profound difference. It's just that sometimes we can get in the way of that and find it difficult then, because we get stuck in our own internal like loop that we keep on going around and around. And so we want to be able to step out of that. Okay, so one thing I also just want to quickly note as well is I think that sometimes if we say afraid to fail, sometimes we want to use that. And because I went and saw Ant Middleton, which he does the SAS. So I don't know if you know him, but he does that SAS kind of boot camp thing. So he's an ex-SAS soldier, and he does this training camp, I guess, for people and a TV series. So he came to Australia and he was speaking, and he talked about this like fear bubble. So he had like this fear bubble, and it's like so often that people get stuck in their fear bubble. Can you imagine just like living in this like kind of bubble? And then you're thinking about all the things that you're fearing, but it actually hasn't even happened yet. And so it's this kind of idea, which I thought was really beautiful in terms of creating this like visual idea of like, Well, you don't really need to be in the fear bubble until you're actually at that point, until you're actually with a client and you're like, I'm really stuck now. I'm not sure what to do. Or you're at a point where you're like, okay, I'm about to ask a client, would you like to buy from me? And you're like, now I feel the fear bubble. But so many times we're actually projecting something that might happen months or a year down the track, or even a day later, and we're already projecting and feeling how we feel, but it hasn't even happened. So it's also giving us great feedback to say, well, how do we stay in the present moment instead of projecting it out into the future, what might happen in the future, because it might happen, and working through our dynamic there. So I'm going to quickly, so one of the dynamics that I notice with people who have the fear of failure, and it is definitely because it's very difficult to, if you've ever wondered, I want to go and figure out my purpose, and I want to have more purpose in my life, and I want to be able to go and make a profound difference in someone's life. I want to make an impact. I want to leave a legacy. I want to do something with my life. I feel like I have something in me. But then you're struggling to even go out and to create or know or have certainty in what that looks like. And because when we have fear, we project that fear out into the future, then it almost like it becomes hazy. It's like you can't see your future because there's all these fear bubbles in front of you, and you can't actually kind of poke your eyes through and actually see what your future lies, because there's too much like anxiety and fear with your future. And so this is one great exercise that you can really go in. We've actually got a really beautiful course inside of Maximum Growth Academy, which is called Overcoming Your Fear of Failure. And it really deep dives into you being able to dissolve and resolve your fear, or start to have a greater awareness of what actually, and go deeper with what is actually going on, so you can clear that. And then that's the beginning part of then getting more clarity with your purpose, that gets you to be able to know what your vision and your mission is. And that will start to come into fruition, or come much clearer for you when you dissolve a lot more of the fears that you have. So I just want to share with you one more thing, because part of it is I want you to imagine that if we had a process, and that process was about helping you to kind of work out, well, what is really driving your fear, and what's really going on in your mind, and really create that freedom from fear. So we have inside of Maximum Growth Academy, we have something which is called the Freedom from Fear Matrix. So let me kind of do a rough work through on this for you, and you have to go deep diving into it. So I want you to imagine that this line down the very bottom, so the x-axis is your time or your age. And so we're going to have your age of 0 is going to be at the first part here. I'll just put it in somehow my text is white, which you can't see. So we're going to put 0 here. And then we're going to put your other age, which you have here. So I'm 42. And you're going to put whatever time age you are. So you're going to put that there. So this one then is infatuation, is up here. And then we have resentment down the bottom. So I want you to imagine then all the way down. Okay, team. So now what we want to be able to do is we're going to find moments across your lifetime in which you can say that that's actually a moment in my life that I'd love to go and resolve, dissolve, and evolve from, that's maybe entangled with some kind of fear, but also or failure, and also the attachment to success. So we want to do both. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scan my life, and I'm going to ask, okay, so at what point in my life have I been having a fear of failure? And so I'm going to go from now. So I'd say there's a little bit of an element. I'm going to go down here. So these are the degree of which I'm going to be resentful or challenged by it. So I'm going to say, I'd probably say it's more like a 2. If that's 1 to 5, I'd say it's a 2. So I'm going to put that there. So there's an element there that I'm kind of feeling in a dynamic in my life right now. I'm going to go back. So 42, I'm going to go back to about here because I definitely had a big fear of failure when my marriage ended. That was huge. I remember being on the airplane, flying home. That was pretty big. I'm going to go to another moment. Okay, I'm going to go for a moment. And that was, I'd say maybe more like here. So this is when Bonnie was born. I just had this like, what happens if I fail as a mom? And, you know, what happens if I mess her up? And all those things that might bubble up when you're a brand new parent. And so there's those. Okay, great. So I'm going to keep on going back. I can go back to a fear of failure that I had when I remember when I was like 18 years old and I left home. And I was like, well, what happens if I have to come back home again? And what happens if it doesn't work out? And so I'm like, well, that's maybe a little bit. It wasn't too fearful. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through moment after moment after moment. So going to be lots of them. Then I also want to go into have a look at the moments that I thought that I've been infatuated with the success and where I've been infatuated with success. Okay. So to be like, okay, so there was a moment I'd say here. Oh, that was about Bonnie. So it's actually about here where I felt like there was definitely an infatuation with success around work and work dynamic, just because of a particular client that I started working with who was top of their field, international, very well known. And so I go back to another moment when I was, say, speaking with Global One, and there was a degree I felt of traveling Australia and when I landed the opportunity. So I'd say from here, there was definitely a moment there and the degree of infatuation. And so what's going to happen is over the time, as you keep on doing this, you're going to put more and more markers. What we're going to do is at the very end, when you take a snapshot at what it will look like at the end, we're going to go, okay, is there more down the bottom where you have more resentment and the fear of failure? Or is there more attachment to success? Because this is going to be giving you a great kind of feedback to figure out, are you more attached to success, which is driving the fear of failure? Or is it just really just the fear of failure that's actually the issue? It's sometimes both. And so it's going to give you a really beautiful kind of big picture overview of your life and where you're sitting with fear and failure and success, and then gives you definitely pinpoint moments to start working through and applying the Demartini method, which is why we come into class each and every week. Gives you that opportunity to be able to do that. So then you'll be able to shift and dissolve the emotional charges that you have. So that is our freedom from the fear of failure for today. Definitely, hopefully you found it valuable for you to be able to think about maybe your own fear. I just want to bring, like, I know that with some people, catastrophe thinking can be really big. And so we can kind of catastrophize ourselves and think more and more and more. And so that can be a way that we actually inhibit our ability to do thinking and actually start doing any forward planning. So if we're in that point in fear of failure where it's so much that it's just so extreme, then just starting with that big picture freedom from failure matrix is going to help you to kind of start to have a bit of a bird's eye view of what's actually going on in your mind. And then what we want to do is, in order to dissolve that fear of failure, catastrophe thinking, you just want to go through each moment by moment, and start to shift and work through those. So hopefully you found that helpful and insightful. I'd love to know your thoughts, your comments. Feel free to share it in the chat section below. So thank you, team, and I look forward to seeing you at the next perfect time.